chamber of the Galactic Council was filled with cold light and colder voices. Aliens of every kind sat high on their thrones, their eyes looking down on the human delegation with contempt. Captain Daniel Brooks stood tall in the center of the hall, his uniform worn but his back straight. Beside him, Admiral Laura Carter kept her hands tightly folded, her face calm but her heart pounding. The verdict had already been whispered in the corners, but when the council's speaker finally announced it aloud, the words cut through the hall like a blade. Humanity was banished. The reason was spoken in polished words, but the truth was clear. The council no longer trusted humans. They said humans were too unpredictable, too dangerous, too passionate in their wars. They said humanity had grown too quickly, too boldly. Breaking rules meant to keep balance. Daniel wanted to shout that it was not true, that humans only fought to survive, but he knew it would not matter. The decision had already been made long before he entered the hall. The chamber was filled with alien whispers, some mocking, some fearful, some relieved. The Zoran delegates hissed that the humans had always been troublemakers. The tall, cold-eyed Varans muttered that humans could never be trusted with fleets. The Krail warlords smiled, thinking they would take human colonies and trade routes once Earth was weak. Laura saw their faces and her jaw tightened. She wanted to draw her weapon, but she stood silent because defiance here would only be used as proof of the accusations. The council speaker raised his hand and declared that humanity's colonies would no longer have representation. Their fleets would be stripped, their trade rights cut, their diplomats sent back in shame. The words echoed across the hall, final and cruel. Humanity was no longer welcome among the stars. Daniel looked up at the counselors. He did not lower his head. He did not beg. He only said, in a low voice that carried farther than he expected, "You may banish us, but you will never break us." The guards moved forward, armored alien soldiers with eyes like glass. They signaled for Daniel and Laura to leave. As they walked out of the chamber, every eye followed them, some with scorn, some with curiosity, and a few with silent fear, because those few remembered what humans were capable of when cornered. Outside the council's towering hall, the human delegation gathered, their faces pale, their voices angry. Some demanded to protest, others whispered of surrender, but Daniel silenced them, his voice steady. "We will not bow. They think they have ended us, but they have only given us reason to rise." Laura stood at his side and added, "Humanity will not fade into silence. The stars will remember us." When they returned to their transport ship, the weight of exile pressed down like a mountain. The crew sat quietly, the engines hummed, and the stars outside looked colder than ever. But in the silence, an idea began to form in Daniel's mind. He thought of the unfinished project hidden deep in the asteroid belts, a warship unlike any other, one the Council had forbidden, one humanity had secretly built piece by piece. He thought of the Iron Will, and he knew humanity's story was not ending. It was only beginning. Back on Earth and across human colonies, the news spread quickly. Broadcasts carried the Council's decree. Some wept, some raged, others fell silent. Factories slowed, ports closed, fleets were recalled. But under the grief there was a current of anger. It flowed like a hidden river, strong and dangerous. Humanity was humiliated, but humanity had always turned pain into strength. Daniel and Laura gathered the last loyal officers, men and women who had fought in countless battles, engineers who had worked in secret, pilots who had sworn oaths that no council could break. Their faces were tired, but when Daniel told them the council's words, their eyes lit with fire. They knew what had to be done. They would not fade. They would not let Earth die quietly. As the transport moved away from the council's shining world, Daniel looked out into the blackness of space. His reflection stared back from the window, weary but unbroken. Laura stood beside him and whispered, "They think they have caged us, but they have only opened the door to something they cannot control." Daniel nodded slowly, his hand tightening on the rail. The council had made a mistake. They had forgotten what humans truly were: survivors, builders, warriors, and dreamers. They had banished humanity, but all they had done was give them a reason to rise stronger than ever before. And so, in that moment of silence, the future was decided. Humanity was cast out, but not broken. And somewhere in the dark, a warship waited, and the galaxy would soon tremble. Far away from the shining halls of the Galactic Council, hidden in the black emptiness of a dead system, there was a secret that only a few humans knew. Inside the shadows of broken asteroids and shattered moons lay the skeleton of something enormous, something dangerous, something forbidden. It was the Iron Will, an unfinished dreadnought, humanity's last gamble. When Captain Daniel Brooks and Admiral Laura Carter stepped off their small transport ship and onto the hidden dock carved into an asteroid's heart, the crew that waited there stood to attention. They were engineers, pilots, and soldiers who had chosen exile over surrender. Their uniforms were patched, their faces marked with scars and grease, but their eyes burned with the same fire. They had been waiting for this moment. Daniel walked among them. He could feel the weight of their hope pressing against his shoulders. The Iron Will was massive. Its black hull stretched across the hidden dock like a sleeping beast. Panels still unfinished, cannons silent, engines quiet. For years it had been built in secret, far from the Council's eyes, piece by piece smuggled in from hidden workshops, each section carried by freighters that pretended to haul ore or supplies. The Council thought they had control over every human shipyard. But they had missed this one. The project whispered in shadows, now stood ready to awaken. Laura walked down the steel platforms, her hand brushing against the cold hull. She could almost feel the heartbeat of the ship. A weapon designed not to defend but to terrify. Railgun mounts hung like claws. Missile bays lined its sides, and deep inside its core lay a reactor powerful enough to tear through entire fleets. It was more than a ship. It was a message. Humanity would not bow. The engineers rushed forward to greet them. One of them, an older man named Ethan, his hair gray and hands shaking from years of hard work, smiled through the oil stains on his face. He told Daniel the engines were alive again, that the main power core had finally stabilized. The ship could move. Not yet perfect, not yet complete, but strong enough to fight. Daniel gripped his shoulder and said it was enough. The galaxy didn't need to see perfection, it needed to see power. The crew worked day and night, welding armor plates, calibrating weapon systems, and testing navigation. Sparks flew through the docking bay. The sound of hammers and drills echoed against the walls. Every man and woman there knew they were committing treason in the Council's eyes, but none cared. Their families had been cast aside, their worlds abandoned. Now they would build something that gave humanity a voice again. Daniel and Laura moved among them, not as commanders giving orders, but as comrades lifting steel, beams and tightening bolts. Their presence gave strength. Their determination kept fear at bay. When the engines finally roared to life, the entire dock shook. The deep hum spread through the rock and metal, vibrating in every chest. Lights came alive across the ship's surface, 1,000 panels glowing red and white. The Iron Will opened its eyes for the first time, and everyone on the dock cheered, some with laughter, some with tears. They had built something no council could have imagined humans were capable of. In exile, Daniel stood on the command bridge for the first time. The massive windows stretched out to the void. The consoles lit with fresh data. Laura joined him at the captain's chair. Though she knew this was his ship to command, they looked at each other. No words were needed. This ship was not just metal and fire. It was their answer to the betrayal, a promise that humanity would never again be underestimated. The first test was simple. They powered the thrusters and moved the warship slowly out of the asteroid's dock. Dust and rock scattered in the void. The ship groaned, then steadied, gliding forward like a predator. The crew watched from every station, their eyes wide as the black hull cut through the starfield. Laura whispered under her breath, "She is alive," and Daniel only nodded, his jaw tight. They tested the weapons next. One railgun shot into a lifeless moon. The impact shattered the rock into 1,000 glowing pieces. The fragments floated like fireflies in the darkness. Then they tested the plasma cannons. Blue fire burned across empty space, leaving trails that glowed long after. The power of the ship was undeniable. Every test proved that the Iron Will was more than rumor. It was real. But with power came risk. The Council might not yet know about the ship, but it was only a matter of time before whispers reached their spies. Daniel gathered the crew in the central hall, his voice strong though the weight of responsibility was heavy. He told them that they were no longer soldiers of the Council, they were soldiers of humanity. Every system they powered, every weapon they fired would mark humanity's return. He told them the Council feared humans because they knew the truth. Humans did not give up, and now they had the iron will to prove it. The crew roared in agreement, fists raised, their voices echoing through the halls of the ship. Laura watched them. She could see their fear, but also their pride. She knew they would follow Daniel anywhere, even into fire, especially into fire. The ship was not just a weapon, it was a symbol, and symbols were stronger than fleets. As the Iron Will left the asteroid dock and entered the dark sea of stars, Daniel stood at the center of the bridge, staring forward into the void. The galaxy believed humanity was broken, scattered, defeated. But soon they would learn the truth. The forgotten fleet was not gone. It had been waiting, and with one ship, one dreadful ship, humanity would make the stars tremble again. It started as whispers, nothing more than tavern talk in the smoky corners of alien markets. Smugglers laughed as they told stories of a massive human warship drifting silently through the dark. They claimed it appeared out of nowhere, struck with fire and iron, then vanished back into the shadows. At first no one believed them. Humans were banished, their fleets destroyed, their colonies broken. How could they build such a ship? Yet the whispers spread like fire through dry grass because every smuggler's tale carried the same detail. The ship was black, massive, and carried the mark of humanity. In the docks of the Zoran traders, a scarred pilot swore he had seen the beast with his own eyes. He told anyone who would listen that the ship had come from nowhere, fired railguns that ripped through pirate raiders and then disappeared, leaving nothing but wreckage. The other aliens in the bar mocked him, saying humans had no ships left, but the fear in his eyes could not be mocked away. In the far-off colonies of the Krail, merchants whispered that their pirate allies had been destroyed in the void, their fleets shattered in minutes by something they could not see coming. The Council dismissed these stories as lies, propaganda, or desperate human tricks, but in the silence of their chambers, some of the counselors trembled. They remembered history. They remembered what humans had done in their wars long ago. Every empire that had underestimated humanity had paid dearly. Humans were reckless, yes, but they were also clever. And when cornered, they fought like no other. On the Iron Will, Captain Daniel Brooks and Admiral Laura Carter listened to intercepted broadcasts. Smugglers, traders, and frightened patrols were already spreading their name across the stars. Laura smiled faintly as she listened to a panicked alien voice begging for reinforcements against the ghost ship. Daniel said nothing, his face hard. He knew fear was a weapon more powerful than any cannon. The ship had not fought many battles yet, but already it lived in the minds of their enemies. That was the first victory. The crew felt the change too. At first they had been afraid, wondering if they could survive against the galaxy's fleets. But now every whispered rumor filled them with pride. The galaxy was talking about them. The galaxy was afraid of them. Young pilots walked the halls of the dreadnought with their heads higher. Engineers worked with faster hands because they knew their work was not in vain. One night, when the ship was gliding silently through the dark edge of a nebula, Laura stood at the observation deck. She looked at the stars and thought of Earth, far away, silenced by the Council's decree. Then she thought of the whispers spreading faster than light. She whispered to herself, "They wanted us forgotten, but they cannot forget what they fear." Daniel joined her quietly, his eyes on the stars, and said, "Let them whisper. Soon they will scream." The Iron Will struck again, this time against a pirate fleet that had been raiding human colonies. The battle was swift and merciless. Plasma cannons turned enemy cruisers into burning. Rex railguns shattered their command ship in a single blow, and the survivors fled into the dark. But they carried stories with them, stories of a black human dreadnought whose guns spoke like thunder. These stories reached even deeper into the galaxy. Every retelling grew larger, every detail sharper, and the myth of the ghost warship was born in alien marketplaces. Merchants now avoided human survivors not out of hatred but out of fear. In the great ports of the Council, Captains refused to take contracts near human space, and in the hidden rebel cells of oppressed species, whispers of the human warship were spoken. With hope, if the humans could strike back against the Council, maybe others could too. The Council grew restless. Reports piled up on their tables, patrols lost, pirate allies destroyed, trade routes disrupted. Still, they refused to admit the truth, that humans had built something the galaxy had never seen. They called it impossible. They said humans were weak, broken, scattered. But even as they spoke those words, they ordered their fleets to increase patrols. They doubled the guards along their borders because deep down they did not believe their own lies. On the Iron Will's bridge, the crew listened as more and more alien voices carried tales of their ship. The dreadnought's name was spreading even before it was spoken aloud. Laura leaned close to Daniel and said, "The galaxy is starting to tremble." And Daniel finally allowed himself a small smile, not because the battle was won, but because the war had truly begun. The whispers continued to grow, like storm clouds before a hurricane, and though the Council tried to silence them, fear traveled faster than orders, faster than fleets, faster than truth, and soon every star system knew humanity had returned, not as beggars, not as victims, but as a shadow in the void. A shadow, with teeth, a shadow with fire, the ghost of humanity's rage carried on the back of one dreadful warship. The Council patrol fleet moved through the dark edge of human space with ease. They believed there was nothing left to fear. Their cruisers glided in formation, engines glowing faintly. The commanders joked on their channels, mocking humans as weak and broken. Their orders were simple. They were to sweep the border systems, destroy any hidden outposts, and remind humans they no longer had power. But the void was not as empty as they thought. Hidden in the shadow of a cold asteroid field, the Iron Will waited, its massive black hull silent, its crew ready. On the bridge, Captain Daniel Brooks stood tall, his eyes fixed on the glowing shapes of the alien fleet moving across the star map. Admiral Laura Carter stood at his side, her voice calm but sharp. "This is our moment," she said. "One strike, and the whole galaxy will hear it." Daniel nodded. He gave the order to power the weapons. Deep inside the ship, reactors hummed, railguns, locked onto targets, missile bays opened with slow precision. The crew moved with discipline, no fear in their eyes, only determination. They knew what was at stake. This was not just a battle. It was humanity's first roar after exile. The alien patrol did not notice the dreadnought until it was too late. The first railgun fired. The round tore through the nearest cruiser like paper. The explosion lit the void, pieces of metal scattering into the darkness. Alarms screamed across the patrol fleet. The commander shouted orders, shields up, evasive, maneuvers. But the Iron Will did not stop. Its plasma cannons unleashed blue fire, burning through another ship's defenses. The patrol fleet's formation shattered in seconds. Laura gave orders with sharp precision, targeting engines, crippling ships before they could flee. Daniel's voice carried across the bridge, steady and strong. "No mercy. Let them know who we are." Missiles streaked through space, slamming into the alien flagship. Its shield cracked, then broke. Flames spread across its hull. The enemy's comms filled with panic. They were shouting about the ghost ship, the human dreadnought. Their fear was louder than their weapons. The patrol tried to fight back. Their beams cut through the darkness, striking the Iron Will's shields. The ship shuddered but held. The engineers cheered as the systems absorbed the blows. This ship had been built for war, built for survival. The aliens could not match its power. Daniel gave the order for a second volley. The dreadnought's railguns thundered again, tearing through another battleship. The void became a graveyard of burning wrecks. One alien commander tried to rally his fleet, screaming that humans could not have built such a ship, that it was a trick. But his words ended when the Iron Will's plasma beam tore his cruiser in half. The surviving ships broke formation and scattered. Some tried to flee into the nebula. Others shut down weapons and begged for mercy. The human crew watched as the mighty Council fleet turned into frightened prey. On the bridge, Laura's voice was cold. "This is the message. They will carry our name with them." Daniel stood at the command chair, his jaw set, his eyes on the burning field. He said, "Let them. Live, a few must survive to tell the story. Fear will travel faster than any fleet. The crew understood. It was not enough to destroy. Humanity needed the galaxy to tremble. The surviving alien ships limped away, broadcasting frantic distress signals, warning that a human dreadnought had risen from the shadows. Their words echoed through every channel. The legend of the Iron Will spread further, faster. The crew of the dreadnought stood tall at their stations, their hearts pounding with pride. They had not just won. They had announced to the galaxy that humanity was not broken. When the battlefield grew silent, the Iron Will drifted among the wreckage. Fire and twisted metal floated in the void. Daniel looked at his crew. He told them this was only the beginning. Today the galaxy had seen what humanity was capable of. Tomorrow they would see more. Laura placed her hand on the cold railing and whispered so only he could hear. They thought we were finished, but now they will remember us with fear. The wreckage of the Council fleet burned behind them as the Iron Will turned away, its engines glowing like the eyes of a predator. The crew knew the war had begun, but they were no longer afraid. The galaxy would whisper their name. The Council would tremble and every star would know. Humanity had struck its first blow and it would not be the last. The Council chamber was in chaos. Alien leaders filled the hall with shouts and accusations. The once calm and orderly chamber now trembled with fear. Word had spread faster than any ship. A human dreadnought had destroyed an entire patrol fleet. The survivors' reports had shaken every delegate. They spoke of a black ship that moved like a ghost, with cannons that shattered shields and missiles that cut through warships as if they were nothing. The delegates argued, their voices rising. Above one another, some races demanded immediate action. The Zoran, proud and arrogant, slammed their claws on the table, shouting that humanity must be erased completely. They warned that if one human ship could do this, then others might be hiding in the shadows. The Krail warlords agreed, their deep voices booming. They demanded that the Council send every available fleet to scour human space until nothing remained. But other delegates hesitated, their eyes filled with doubt. The Varens, calm and calculating, raised their voices. They warned that sending too many fleets against humans would only fuel rebellion in other corners of the galaxy. They said if humans had allies in the shadows, then war could spread faster than the Council could control. Whispers moved across the chamber, whispers of rebellion, whispers of oppressed species watching closely. For if humans could strike back, maybe they could too. The Council speaker tried to bring order, but the chamber was drowning in fear. Some delegates accused others of secretly helping humans. Others shouted that it was impossible for exiled humans to build a dreadnought of such scale, but the wreckage reports could not be denied. The destroyed ships told the truth. The Iron Will was real behind closed doors. The Council's most powerful members gathered in secret, their faces pale, their voices tense. They admitted what the public chamber could not. Humanity had always been underestimated. Humans were adaptable, unpredictable, and relentless. If they had built one ship, what stopped them from building more? Panic spread among them. They spoke of their colonies near human space, of their trade fleets, of their fragile borders, all of them suddenly vulnerable. Back in their home systems, fleets were scrambled, borders tightened, and checkpoints doubled. Alien commanders barked orders to their soldiers, warning them that humans were cunning predators. They reminded their troops to fire without hesitation if they saw anything resembling the human dreadnought. Still, no matter how strong their fleets were, fear lingered. The thought of facing the Iron Will made even experienced commanders uneasy. News reached the common people across the galaxy. Traders whispered in marketplaces. Civilians gathered, in fear. Some celebrated the return of human power. Others trembled at the thought of human vengeance. Smugglers who once mocked humans now refused to fly near human space. The galaxy began to shift. One ship had changed everything. On the Iron Will, Daniel Brooks and Laura Carter listened to intercepted transmissions. The crew gathered around as reports of panic filled their ears. Alien delegates shouting, fleets moving, borders closing. Laura smiled thinly and said, "They are afraid." Daniel nodded slowly, his voice calm. "Fear is a weapon, one more powerful than any cannon, and now the Council wields it against themselves." The crew felt a sense of pride. Their actions had shaken the mighty Council. They had not just won a battle. They had forced the galaxy to remember humanity's strength. Still, Daniel warned them that the fight was far from over. The Council would not rest until they tried to crush humanity completely. But now, he said, the galaxy trembles before us, and that tremble is our shield. The Council struggled to find unity. Some leaders pushed for diplomacy, whispering that perhaps the humans could be brought back under strict control. Others rejected the idea, claiming humans could never be trusted again. The debate dragged on for hours, but no decision brought comfort. Because deep down, they all knew the truth. The balance of the galaxy had shifted. In distant colonies, alien civilians looked at the stars with new thoughts. They remembered human traitors, human friends, human soldiers who had once stood beside them. They remembered how quickly the Council had cast humanity aside. Some began to wonder if the Council was as just as it claimed. Quiet seeds of doubt were planted, and those seeds would grow. As the Council hall finally dimmed, and its delegates returned to their worlds, one thing remained certain. The humans were no longer forgotten. They were no longer silent. One ship, the Iron Will, had forced an entire galaxy to panic. Daniel's words came true. Respect would not be asked for. It would be taken. And the galaxy now trembled because it knew the humans had returned. The galaxy was filled with fear. But not everyone saw the rise of the human dreadnought as a curse. Some saw it as hope. In the dark corners of forgotten stations and among the hidden networks of smugglers, whispers turned into secret messages. Oppressed races who had long lived under the Council's iron grip began to take interest in humanity's defiance. For the first time in years, someone had stood against the Council and lived. On the Iron Will, Daniel Brooks studied intercepted transmissions, rebel codes hidden inside merchant chatter, smugglers offering strange routes. Laura Carter stood beside him, reading carefully. She knew what this meant. Not all aliens were enemies. Some were looking at humanity and seeing a chance to fight back against the Council. It began small. A group of smugglers from the broken moons of Zeth approached secretly. They offered fuel and supplies in exchange for protection, Daniel agreed. But he made it clear, humanity would not become mercenaries. They would not be used like tools. They would take only what they needed and give back what they could. Still, this deal opened a door and soon more followed. From the dust plains of Vera came encrypted signals. Rebels who had lived in hiding for decades reached out. Their people had been crushed under the Council's taxes and fleets. Their leaders imprisoned or killed. They had nothing left but hatred. They sent maps of Council patrol routes, data on weak supply lines, even stolen access codes. Laura studied these with sharp eyes, saying quietly, "The enemy of our enemy may not be our friend, but they can help us strike harder." Inside the Iron Will's halls, the crew began to feel the change. At first they were alone, hunted, the only light of humanity in the dark. But now they were being joined, not by humans but by voices from other stars, voices that whispered rebellion. The crew talked in the mess hall about strange cargo arriving in hidden docks, weapons that were not human-made, crates of alien fuel, armor plating smuggled from Council factories. They realized they were no longer isolated. Humanity had allies, even if they came from shadows. Daniel did not trust easily. He knew alliances could be traps, spies could be among them, and betrayal was always possible, so he tested every ally carefully, sometimes refusing help until it was proven, sometimes demanding proof of loyalty before giving trust. Laura often reminded him that desperation made strange bedfellows, but Daniel's caution kept the ship safe. Still, he admitted privately to her one night, "We cannot win this war alone." And she agreed. The first real test of these new alliances came during a supply run. Smugglers promised safe passage through a sector controlled by the Krail warlords, but when the Iron Will entered, a council ambush waited. The smugglers had betrayed them. Yet before the trap could close, another group arrived, rebel fighters from Vera, their small ships darting through space like angry insects, distracting. The council fleet long enough for the Iron Will to break through. Daniel realized then that while some allies would betray, others would bleed for the chance to strike at their oppressors. After the battle, the rebel leader sent a message to Daniel. Her voice crackling with static, she said, "We do not fight for you, human, we fight for freedom. But for now, our path is the same." Daniel respected that honesty. He replied, "We do not seek to rule you. We only seek to survive. Together. Maybe we can do both." The line went silent. But he knew an understanding had been formed. As weeks passed, the Iron Will became more than just a ship. It became a symbol, not only for humanity but for others who had been silenced. Smugglers, rebels, broken colonies, all whispered of the human dreadnought, not just as a weapon but as proof that the Council was not untouchable. The crew of the Iron Will felt this too. Pride grew among them. They walked taller, they worked harder, because they saw that every battle they fought was inspiring others to rise. One night on the observation deck, Laura watched the stars and said softly, "They cast us out thinking we would vanish. But instead, we are building something larger than ourselves." Daniel joined her, his eyes on the darkness beyond. He answered, "We were banished, but now we carry not only our people's hope but the hope of many. We must be careful." Laura nodded. Careful, but unafraid. The galaxy was changing slowly, silently. The Council still held its fleets, still commanded fear, but cracks were forming. Rebellions sparked in distant systems, smuggling networks refused Council orders. Whispers of freedom spread, and at the heart of it all was one black warship and its determined crew. For the first time since exile, humanity was not alone. The shadows that once threatened to consume them now carried allies, and though trust was fragile, one truth was clear. The galaxy had begun to shift, and the Council's grip was loosening. The trap was set. The Council had finally gathered enough courage to strike. They had tracked the movements of the Iron Will through whispers and false promises, and they believed they had cornered the human dreadnought inside the Silent Veil Nebula, a place where light bent strangely and ships often vanished without trace. The nebula was thick with swirling clouds of dust and ion storms. Sensors barely worked inside. But the Council was desperate. They sent a fleet 3 times larger than what the Iron Will could possibly face. Battleships, cruisers, and frigates filled the edges of the nebula like a net. On the bridge of the Iron Will, Captain Daniel Brooks studied the readings. Though the nebula interfered with sensors, he knew well enough what was coming. The Council wanted to finish humanity once, and, for all, Admiral Laura Carter stood beside him, her voice steady though her eyes were sharp. "They outnumber us, Daniel. But this is our ground." He nodded. The nebula was dangerous, unpredictable, but to humans, danger was only another weapon. The crew, prepared in silence, engineers checked the reactors, pilots loaded torpedoes, gunners sat at their stations with hands tight on the controls. The ship hummed like a beast ready to strike. Daniel walked through the bridge and reminded them, "We are not fighting to survive. We are fighting to show them who we are." His words echoed in their hearts, their fear turned into fire. The Council fleet entered the nebula cautiously, their ship's lights piercing the dark clouds. Beams of scanners cut through the mist but failed to hold steady. Voices of commanders barked through comms, warning their crews to stay in formation. They thought they were hunters closing in, but in truth they were the prey. The Iron Will moved silently, its black hull blending with the shadows of the nebula. The first strike came swift. The dreadnought's railguns fired from the mist, tearing through a cruiser before its shields could even activate. The explosion lit the cloud, casting strange shadows across the fleet. Panic broke out. Captains shouted for direction. But by the time they regrouped, the Iron Will had already moved, slipping deeper into the storm. Plasma cannons fired next, slicing through a frigate's hull, sparks and flames scattering into the nebula. The enemy could not see where the fire was coming from. Their sensors screamed but showed nothing. Daniel gave quick commands: move, strike, vanish. The Iron Will was no longer a ship in their eyes. It became a ghost of war, appearing and disappearing, its weapons roaring like thunder and then fading into silence. The Council fleet tried to answer with blind fire. Beams and missiles filled the nebula, but they hit only clouds and empty space. Laura's voice cut through the chaos, guide them into their own fire, and the human pilots maneuvered with cunning precision, weaving the dreadnought between enemy ships, forcing them to collide, to shoot one another in the fog. The nebula became a graveyard of broken ships. Explosions flared and then vanished into the swirling gas. The screams of enemy comms filled the airwaves. Daniel listened without pity. They had hunted his people long enough. Now they would taste what humanity could do when pushed. One by one, the Council ships fell. Battleships cracked open. Frigates torn to pieces. Cruisers burned until their lights went dark. But the battle was not without risk. The Iron Will shuddered. As enemy fire finally struck its shields, sparks burst across the bridge. Alarm screamed. The crew held their ground. Engineers rushed to stabilize the power core, but no one panicked. Daniel's voice remained calm. Hold steady. One more push. And Laura gave the order. Full volley, all weapons. The dreadnought unleashed its fury. Railguns, plasma beams, missiles. Everything fired at once. The blast turned the nebula bright as a small sun. And when the light faded, half the enemy fleet was gone. The survivors broke. Commanders screaming retreat, their voices filled with terror. The once proud Council fleet scattered like frightened animals, leaving wreckage and flames behind. The Iron Will did not pursue. Daniel had already decided, let them run. Their fear will carry the truth farther than we ever could. The crew erupted in cheers, exhausted but alive. They had faced a force 3 times their size and emerged victorious. Laura looked across the bridge. Her heart swelling with pride, she whispered, "This ship is not just steel. It is the will of our people." Daniel stood at the center, his eyes cold, his words heavy with meaning. Today the galaxy will understand. We are not broken. We are not gone. We are human. When the Iron Will left the silent veil, the nebula glowed faintly with the burning remains of the Council fleet. The story of the battle spread faster than any official report, smugglers told it in hushed tones. Rebels celebrated it in secret. Even loyal Council citizens whispered about the ghost ship that had destroyed an entire armada. For the first time, the galaxy did not just whisper about humanity. It trembled, because one ship, one crew, and one people had proved the Council wrong. And the legend of the Iron Will was no longer just rumor. It was truth written in fire and wreckage across the stars. The Silent Veil battle had ended, but its echoes reached far beyond the nebula. Across colonies and starports, the story spread faster than light. A single human dreadnought had faced the Council's might and survived. No, more than survived. It had torn through fleets and left them burning. The galaxy trembled at the news, for the Council had promised humanity was broken. Yet here was proof they were not only alive, but stronger than anyone had dared to believe. In the grand markets of alien worlds, traders whispered in fear. They spoke of a warship black as night, with guns that roared like thunder, and missiles that struck with the fury of storms. Some swore they saw it with their own eyes. Others swore their cousin's cousin had escaped its fire. Even when stories were exaggerated, the truth lay beneath them. The Iron Will was real, and it was unstoppable. The Council tried to control the news. They called the battle exaggerated. They claimed the survivors had panicked and lied, but the wreckage in space could not be hidden. Burned hulls floated near the nebula. Beacons screamed distress for days, and scavengers carried proof back to markets. Broken pieces of ships marked with Council insignia. Every fragment was a reminder. Humanity had struck back. Inside the Council chamber, panic became a shadow that touched every delegate. The Zoran demanded full-scale war, The Vayrons argued for negotiations. The Krail warlords shouted for blood. But none of them could hide their fear. Their fleets had been humiliated, their pride shattered. They began to wonder if more human dreadnoughts were hidden in the dark, if the Iron Will was not alone. Meanwhile, on the Iron Will, the crew stood taller than ever before. The ship hummed, with new life, every corridor alive with energy. The engineers joked about how even the galaxy now feared their creation. The gunners spoke proudly of how their fire had shattered Council pride. Young pilots practiced harder, determined to keep their ship untouchable. For the first time since exile, the crew felt not just like survivors, but like champions. Captain Daniel Brooks addressed them in the main hall, his voice steady, his words sharp. He told them the Council had made a mistake. They had tried to silence humanity, but in doing so, they had given them reason to rise. He reminded them that respect would not be given, it would be taken, and the galaxy now understood. Humanity did not bow. Humanity endured. Humanity fought. His words filled the crew with fire. They roared with cheers, the sound echoing through the ship like thunder. Admiral Laura Carter stood at his side, her gaze calm but fierce. She spoke softly to him afterward, saying, "We have lit a fire that cannot be put out." Daniel nodded, but he also reminded her that fire could spread too far. The Council would come harder now, with bigger fleets, with more traps. Yet he was not afraid. He told her fear was their greatest weapon. And now, the galaxy trembled with it. In the shadows of faraway systems, oppressed colonies celebrated. Rebels who once hid in silence now dared to fight. They painted the symbol of a black warship on their banners. They spread the legend of humanity's return, not as weak outcasts, but as warriors who could not be broken. Smugglers carried supplies not for profit, but for belief. They wanted to be part of something greater, something powerful. The galaxy had changed before. Humans were exiles, forgotten and mocked. Now they were the storm in the dark, the predators who had returned with claws sharper than ever. The Council still had fleets, still had armies, but they no longer had control. Fear had cracked their walls and doubt had entered their people's hearts. One night, Daniel stood at the viewing deck. The stars stretched endless before him. Laura joined him, her hands folded behind her back. She asked him if he thought the galaxy would ever forgive humanity. Daniel looked out into the void and answered, "We do not need forgiveness, we only need respect, and respect is earned in fire." His words hung in the silence, heavy and true. The Iron Will sailed on, carrying the will of its people. Every battle won was more than survival. It was a message, a reminder that humans were not finished. They were just beginning, across the stars, alien children asked their parents about the humans, their voices filled with both fear and awe. Stories of Earth's warriors spread like legends of old. The council trembled, colonies whispered, rebels rose, and through it all, one warship carried humanity's defiance into the heart of the galaxy. The Iron Will was no longer just a ship. It was a promise, a living shadow that haunted empires and inspired the broken. Humanity had been banished, cast aside. But now they were the storm, and the galaxy would never forget. And in the endless silence of space, the stars themselves seemed to hold their breath because humanity had returned, and the galaxy trembled.